so I was just gonna take that slide that I had from last time that had like the schedule. I was just gonna copy that real quick.
That's pretty much all. I'm building one in my basement. I'm retired.
Yeah, right.
Was an electrical engineer for 32 years. Spent the last few years doing integration of robotics and
Neat. What's your robot do?
it's a kitchen robot.
Yeah, okay. I remember you talking about that last time, like you wanted to like set the chaos.
Yeah, set the table, clear the table,
Yeah.
do the dishes, clean up the kitchen.
That's pretty cool.
It's a long ways from that.
What base do you use?
I built it using
Okay. Based on?
a couple motors that I had sitting around.
There's no, most people don't be intense.
Oh, yeah, no, I wanted to do this from the ground up. My interest is more is learning about the whole thing and doing everything. I don't know, just building the basic one, the hell all that.
Actually, we were building some of the same technology. We're all out of old wheelchairs. Wheelchairs, we've got one that's 700 pound capacity.
Sure.
So we're putting a wheel wheel. On the 700 pound wheelchairs.
Neat.
Mobile dump truck. Hey, what's it? Follow me, mobile dump truck. Working on my bike.
Yeah.
Is that your project?
We got another one, we had like 50.
Well, these were some old motors that I had gotten when I was a kid. I've used them for several different things, still have them around. They were originally flat track motors for an airplane. The problem is, most motors, if you reverse the power on them, they go backwards, right?
No.
So you've got a common, and then you've got a forward and a reverse. So you can't put an H bridge on the thing to run like normal motors, right? So you have to do something different. And if they stall out, they draw a tremendous amount of current.
Yeah, I just had electric. That flaps, they had flat motors. On a screw jack, electric screw jacks.
But these things are like 50 years old. So.
Yeah, that's what. These things I think they were
With ROS.
This, yeah, so I have the simulation. Build a controller that has sensors on there and shut them off. Because I've worked on yeah.
The motor is just 8 hours.
Oh, are they?
So on some cases, most public gear.
Like sort of an more abundant state, maybe like here.
Years
before that.
I don't think this is that much, but they're here down to 200 RPM.
They're all from over.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure they were at one time, which is a little bit strange because, our plane power last time has a hot spare in case I'm right over there. You might know better more than me.
Oh, I don't know much about that. I just heard like,
So,
a couple of friends who know.
but that's what I was told when I was a kid. And had the motors in the first place. Good things, right?
I have a good vocabulary.
Oh, okay.
Just really yeah, exactly. Like I know, but I know it pretty close. It seems like it's in some of the choices.
Yeah, so they're probably,
Yeah.
oh, they're not 60 years old.
Well, they have some.
Mark
Came
now.
from
Came from junkyards.
now my wife.
But,
But it is.
so it's been fun trying to figure out how to build a controller, switch to go from forward to back. What do you do? Oh, that's what I was reading. I built a robot base. To run around, so it's a differential drive. So there's two of them there. And so I'm building an
Lots of things are so
without running into things. Yeah. PC. Yeah, so it's a desktop PC. Hey, you know, this thing's gotta be the size of a kid, right?
Okay. I mean, it
But no, it's kind of crawl with it. But that's the.
yeah, yeah, we got
It is, now, I'm retired, so you have to.
Yeah, it's not like your average thing, so that's why it's something you read. It's like a PS phone.
I was an electrical engineer, used to work for one for the last 15 years, computer vision, and last 3 years, I guess, robotics and artificial intelligence. For lots of things, so there were some applications in manufacturing. Which area? No, just, well, actually, yeah, I guess it would be. Yeah, being able to stop a process before it gets to the actual,
Hey, Alan, how's it going? Nice to see you.
We're gonna be getting started.
Great.
Good sir, I'm so sorry.
No, I understand.
How's it going? Did we chat? Yeah, Lewis, John. Yeah, I think we may have chatted at the Tech Stars demo there.
I understand.
Yeah.
I was worried I hate something.
Oh, no,
All right, well, looking forward to seeing you.
I felt like I had to stop for a second. So many.
I'm trying to apply now for Brussels. Not doing a visible progress. Yeah, so getting things together.
Everything present for the, yeah. Was the first page? Who was the first page already?
No, it's all one. It's like several steps which I have like I got the confirmation for the first step. Yeah. Like they want to see application, that's what my step is. But now I'm preparing the real application, which is like huge. 13th of June. And they essentially I need letters for potential employees. I need to actually get letters like saying that if I get money, those people on my project. I need letters like for some incubator which will test me. I need letters for the customers saying that we need it. I need letters for investors saying that I need letters. I need a patent. I need to have IP which I have to actually patent this thing like right from and I'm going to demonstration this Sunday.
Oh,
I'm flying this Sunday. I will be out of this.
yeah, my parents have numbers on it. I think they allow us to do this other thing, it's earlier than anything else.
Yeah, no, I will be
Okay, yeah.
but then Sunday. Yeah, pretty much that's like the question I have now. If you could get me
I've been,
that's pretty much my main point. I don't have like to use, I don't have time to use inside the for now. That's only after one. By the way, did you get any like funds on those? So for which ones? The ones which
Yeah, they like this, but like that's Seattle. Seattle talks about funding.
no, they don't.
They don't fund, yeah.
And from San Francisco, or they want you to do that.
We've been getting a lot of invites, like a lot of people who want information. No one's used it because it's like it's early stage. It's really, early stage.
Yours is early stage. Yours is early stage.
I know.
How I'm possibly going to trust.
It makes almost no sense.
You have to use YAR.
Oh, God.
Because, conversion of some package.
Okay, so I run Yarn. Where do I run?
You do it just on. Yeah. No, you YAR.
Okay, I do.
Oh, try YAR.
No, I mentioned it was an engine. I had those for your previous one.
Okay, I'll talk to other people. I'll leave you like
Yeah, we should take that.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, my descendant. I came back and I should have ranch. I should have visited. I had one.
No, no.
I have it on one side of my neck out.
What process? What process are you using?
NVIDIA chips.
See, that was like the, well, this is why people.
Yeah. What's the,
What?
how would you compare it?
It's still,
Okay.
like, there's certain.
That's
why I was
So
gonna
I
say.
have big differences.
So even those are-
GPU
Yeah.
and.
And I already, oh, wait, I have.
So there's no copy of that GPU.
I got
and that's what
That's great.
infrastructure.
So the GPU was much better.
But-
But other than that,
I think part of
I
it's
mean,
also.
you know, and the fact that it has display.
Well, heck, the backpedal, say,
And,
for between different processes on the same machine, we're not gonna use
That's right.
DDS.
How is those and then pretty
I
similar?
think DDS, great.
in fact, the power.
Packets to the other side of the battleship. Situation, maybe not robust.
Well, I have some ground out of 5. I've run applications that maybe like at 5 a.m. I mean, that.
Yeah, you gotta have a lower impedance connection.
You know, that's great.
It's all you
I don't know. And there's all sorts of politics and things that are happening against this stuff.
What's good, you have visibility, you have,
I think it
and you just have a whole bunch of.
QED underneath, but it's like the rapids. And you know, they have a protocol on top. Just want to answer. Maybe there's a reset like too many times, it doesn't stay. And this, and I never really got to the level.
So you actually need pre-process.
You know what? I would say CSI, that means.
What
So maybe
The pipeline goes through the years.
Okay, so it doesn't work on USB.
And that's
Sort of the marketing stuff. Yes, like, we just need to.
I don't know if that's.
I saw this earlier. This is my activity.
It takes 2 can handle 6-inch feet. But I need a Xavier.
What I see on the server side. A lot of people are doing sort of both at the same time. Yeah, I think most of that's a strategy. Well, we have all this legacy stuff.
No, I'm thinking actually a Xavier.
Sensors, but it's like, it's like, oh, you can maybe a great killer app. Oh, and
Are you just doing that to
sensor,
what modes or whatever, stereo or?
No, we're then, what we're
comes
doing.
online.
Okay.
And then doing, object detection.
That's a good
Classification and doing virtual skills.
But
So,
numbers per se,
where the video is always recorded, the video is always there.
you know, just double the
But
cognitive.
zoom in on 20
And
minutes.
then you're barely functional, and it's no better than all that. Unless,
The point
you know,
is.
sort of in this sort of screen operating on.
Because you can't shove that much data.
You don't want to show all the whole thing, you just want to show.
Yeah.
ROS 2 or ROS, what do you use? ROS 1.
Right now, we got.
Actually, there's 2
Zero,
but it's sort of more on the fringe of your stuff.
Well, in our test.
Yeah.
I've got a 4K.
Maybe I'm not like my way.
This is actually.
But it sounds like for your system.
I assume you're.
No.
Oh, cool.
You know, you just want to.
What you're talking about.
And that one,
Or,
maybe that's great. Maybe that one is great. But sort of, on the other hand, into that.
So Why put the bird detection on the airport? You put it on the airport.
Yes,
maybe
that's exactly what I was working on.
And
But
put
other
the
jobs,
Yeah, see the bird.
yes,
You see a bird.
It's not depending on the resolution of your average camera,
That's
it's
why
like less than 1
you
pixel.
know, the spare.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, that's what we're using the. So we're not the.
Oh,
and like just
You got 4K for there.
yes,
And the two of them together.
yes.
So it's an array, you know, the 4 cameras, the array, and the array is what they own. So 4 cameras, 8 cameras.
What's the
So it's all the lines. And everything you just released, they're not releasing.
There was a startup. You see that they were pushing, or they were running these demonstrations. Yeah. This particular system was.
All right, everybody, we're ready to get started. Feel free to start.
Okay, the one I was seeing was that they changed out.
We were talking.
Oh, wait. Yes.
Yeah, recorded by this or ROS
Maybe we can check afterwards, yeah.
It might be something.
Well, the problem with as I said, virtual schooling.
Yeah.
Oh, you're mostly like.
Destroyed.
So my you should actually just go to our YouTube channel. You search All right, thanks for coming out, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. So we have three talks going tonight. So the first talk we're going to start with is going to talk about code deployment using ROS. Then we have Deer from the CTO of Rob.io. He's going to be doing a presentation on an internal tool that we built. And then we have a lightning talk from Lucas. I'm going to slowly bring everybody in. All right, everybody, we're going to go get started.
Right now we're recording on board. We have our end system cameras, fake cameras, on top of the bottom. And that's just recording on board. There's no
Did I go? No. Huh? Short on time?
For the last
Yeah.
15 years I was working with those computers.
I should squeeze in, give me the phone.
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Still hacking.
Well, I'm still
I retired about 4 years.
Yeah, because I'm not sure on that last one. I did want to, so every time
All right, cool. Yeah, so I'm Alan. Today we want to do a really brief demo of a code deployment tool that we're working on at ROS Seattle. So we've been thinking about a really hard problem in the ROS community of how people are able to maintain and update their devices. So we have two random devices, an Intel NUC and a Raspberry Pi. And both of them, right now they have just an Ethernet connection and just a little dongle on them to light up when we do interactions with them. So one of them I've already configured, and the one that's already configured, we can go ahead and interact with it. Well, actually, I broke something on it. So we're going to use the one that's unconfigured, and we're going to go through the process of taking a computer that's like any other ROS computer, has our basic ROS facilities here. So we have like a ROS environment. We have packages all over the place that we're dealing with, and we're able to build our packages manually. So kind of the first step to taking advantage of the tool that we built is we made a package that uses the new snap command in Ubuntu Linux. So snaps are kind of these things that are trying to replace Debian packages and trying to remove a lot of the problems. They have a lot in common with Docker. In fact, Docker is based on a lot of the same core technology. So we can actually snap install just the ROS Hub daemon. And we're not officially released in the App Store right now. So there's all these special flags to add to it. And after this is basically a ROS package being installed using snaps. So now we have this thing running in the background. And I'm going to have to, because we're not official in the App Store just yet, we have a couple special commands to give permissions. But one of the cool things about the App Store that's coming in Ubuntu lately is that in your software center, you can actually go through and change your permissions that you're giving apps just like you do on Android and iOS.
Alan, sorry, what app store are you talking about?
Yeah, so in Ubuntu, when you go to install an application, say something like the GIMP, or something I don't have installed, like Darktable. I'll just open the store directly. There we go. Yeah. So the Ubuntu store these days is actually two stores hidden in one. So some of your applications, when you look at them, you'll see at the very bottom in here, it says the source of that application. And for old school applications, most of the things in your system, it will say devs or apt. But for certain new applications and more modern applications in the Ubuntu world, they're starting to deploy with snaps. And so you can actually get to the listing pages. So there's actually Snapcraft store at snapcraft.io. And so you can look at a package, for instance, that we recently released. And there's actually App Store pages now. You can add information about what your packages are. And actually under the hood, we get a lot of statistics. A lot of statistics that devs don't give us. So we can actually see things like uninstall rates, update rates, what versions people are sitting on. We can actually see a full picture of the app deployment ecosystem using the Snap Store. So that's kind of why we went with the Snap Store. So I just have to pull a command out of something really quick.
So Snap apps, are they cross-platform?
Yeah, so snaps can be deployed on just about any Linux. They could probably conceivably run everywhere, but Linux people being what they are.
But it's you said it was like Docker, so is it a container?
Yeah, so it's actually using LXC and LXD more directly than Docker does. So Docker, everything that's containers on Linux uses the LXC facility that's part of the Linux kernel. And then the canonical team has layered on top of that an LXD daemon that helps you manage the container system. So in a lot of ways, it ends up behaving, it's got a lot of concepts similar to like Docker, but then, it doesn't go quite as far into like the orchestration in a cloud setting, but then it goes way deeper on confinement in SE Linux configurations. So that's actually what I'm pulling up right now, is I just have to drop in this really complicated set of confinement parameters. So we're going to unconfine this application. We're going to let it have a bunch of access to things like the network. Oops. So each of these things are. So each of the items listed here are permissions that we're giving the application. So if we look at the full listing here, you can see that I'm giving this app permission to access the Bluetooth control, so I can actually turn on or off Bluetooth. I have full access to BlueZ, which is the Bluetooth daemon. I can do a bunch of stuff on the network, observe it, manage interfaces. I can talk raw to the USB, which is for the LED light on the front there. And then I can observe the network state as well. So with all those things together, now when I restart the program, you'll see that this light turned on. So we now have a daemon that we deployed from the App Store. And so once we're fully in the App Store, you won't have to do that whole second process. It'll actually just be snap install. And you have this thing that lights up. So once it's lit up, we can then simply go to ROS Hub and manage this device now. So kind of the first problem that a lot of people run into with a ROS device is, where the heck is it? What's its IP address? Where's the master running? So we really wanted to solve a lot of those hard problems. So the first thing that we do is we're able to find the devices over Bluetooth now. So once you have a snap installed, and we're working with a lot of people who are going to have these snaps pre-installed in their physical equipment. So by the time the robot shows up to you, you might actually purchase a robot that previously has ROS Hub installed. And so you can now select the device that you found through scanning, pair with it, and through this pairing process, if it were claimed, it would error out. If it's not claimed, I can now go ahead and name that device, and we're going to pair with it, and it's going to end up connecting up to the cloud, and at the same time, we're going to be able to then manage it remotely. So we don't have to be in the same room anymore. We don't have to be on the same network. We don't even have to be in Bluetooth range once the pairing process is complete. And then, okay, so the demo gods, will they be nice?
So I assume,
oh yeah.
So I assume this is all being hosted, or where is this being hosted out of right now?
Yeah, so ROS Hub is a public service. So we're going to run it as a public cloud, and this level of access our intention is to be free forever. So kind of like the public repo concept on GitHub. The general idea here is that anyone should be able to keep track of the device and deploy code to it. So we might have had something go wrong. So what's really cool about snaps is in old Linux applications, you have to suddenly go read the documentation anytime something goes wrong. Where do I find where the errors are? How do I know when a system or process is dead or not working correctly? So in the snap ecosystem, we can list all the applications. This is everything at a glance that's running in my system. I can then get a lot of information about any of the given tools that I have in here. So just with the snap info command. And so this starts to tell me things about which version of this app I have installed. So I'm on the correct version. I shouldn't see any bugs in there. It's currently running a daemon service, and it's active. So that looks really good. And then if I think that there's something going wrong, I can read the logs just by saying snap logs, and then whatever service or program I'm curious about. Side doors. Cool. And it actually looks like it worked on that side. I think my browser just got out of sync. Just refresh. So now I have a device, and just to be certain, I'm going to tell it to reset. Since we had a little glitch earlier. And then so when this is all working, we're able to watch that system updating. So whenever
Alan,
that,
this web page is being started off of one computer and you're looking at the status of another one?
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so this website would be, it was actually going to be roshub.io. So you'll simply go to roshub.io and you'll be able to scan for devices over Bluetooth, pair with them, and then watch their behavior afterward. So this device is now running. So when you see the light turn to green, it's booted up all the way. Its state machine has run through whatever configuration it's supposed to be expecting to do. Right now, there's no major configuration. So we can actually come in, we can change that. So the view of the world that we give you is that the ROS Hub daemon can run modules, and we're going to provide a bunch of modules. People can add modules eventually to the daemon side, and it's basically a state machine, and you can just start wiring in more state machines to that, and doing all kinds of things, ROS or Node.js or whatever else you might want to run. So one of the two things that we are introducing on day one are the concept of system packages. So you can actually come to the web and say, I want to install an apt command. I want to run some apt command. So I might want to run the install command for something like, for say, ROS melodic desktop full. And then no other flags. And now when the device reboots, it will go and synchronize to that configuration. And we can tell it any pre-install steps that need to occur. So kind of packages are what state we want the system to be in. And we can give any kind of manual steps that we might need as well, like enumerating USB or enumerating video cards or different things like that. And then so finally, the last step is adding code repository. So when you will first log in with the ROS Hub, you log in with your GitHub account. And so that allows us to help you find your code repositories. And then so you're able to grab a code repository. Right now, this is the 10% hand waving piece of our demo, which is that last piece isn't fully wired right now. But when you attach those code repositories, the device gets notifications from the cloud from that point forward. And we can do all the standard types of CI, CD, event reactions. So pull requests, merges, changes to master, filing of bugs, anything like that. And you can trigger your devices to rerun code, rebuild things, and package. So that's kind of the goal of the ROS Hub first release that we're working on. And we just kind of wanted to put it in a place where we could get some feedback. There's a couple of really cool things that Lewis has been working on, our web developer. One of those concepts is a live editing solution, so that people can make dashboards and share them with each other around on ROS Hub or also on the internet. And so this is all built in React. So React gives us lots of great ways to sandbox pieces of our application and give people the ability to add basically plugins or modules that light up a different UI for them, or that's specific to their use case. So here we actually have a little bit of a GUI snippet that's going to display some owner information about my device. So I could actually come back in here, and there's a whole comprehensive SDK behind all of this as well. But we could actually ask the device for things like its configuration. Let's see, can I await? Can't await.
You could do device data.
Device data, totally.
Device data topic.
There we go. So this is kind of like an example of, this is kind of clearly one of those things where this is more bridging the gap for web developers. So web developers don't have to go and learn every last thing about ROS and figure out how to connect and communicate with those devices themselves, right? This is a way for your web developers to never think about how you push code to the device, how you communicate with the device, and they just come in with devices that are already configured. What we think is interesting about a lot of this interactions that we have right now is it's the sort of thing of you set it up the first time and walk away, and you almost never really need to come back to it if all you want to do is deploy code, see its behavior, go back and modify code. So anyways, with that, if there's any questions, I can take questions. And, cool. All right,
So Alan, who's using it today, and like, how are they using it?
yeah, so right now it's actually just our team. So we've actually, we've gone a lot further than just this feature set. What we were thinking about lately is cutting it, what are the absolute, most crystallizable pieces of tools that ROS developers need this second. And that's kind of when we realized, it's really that first piece of code deployment and keeping track of your device. And that's where we've seen people spend, like 8 hours their first day with a ROS robot just trying to find it on Wi-Fi, or like their first week, trying to learn the network configuration in Linux, by hand. That just takes up so much time. So there's actually a whole Bluetooth command set behind this, so we can actually go grab one of those devices, and you'll see the light change when I gain access to it to blue. And then once I'm on here, I can ask it to scan the Wi-Fi networks and just jump on a Wi-Fi network. So if this had no Ethernet in it or anything like that, I can bootstrap it without having to plug in a keyboard and mouse and all that good stuff. Okay, well, we're not loading lately. That's too bad. And then so just like those basics, we think are the sorts of things that kind of solve a lot of the hard problems really fast, at least. Cool. And I think if that's all the questions, then we should be ready to turn over to Dahir. So let's see if Dahir can hear us. Dahir, can you hear us?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. Let's see. Can everyone hear you? Let me make sure I turn up our volume a bit. Can you say something again?
Hi, how's it going? Testing, what is it?
Oh, it's so quiet. Okay, 1 second. We're going to see if we can crank up the volume a bit more. Or, and can you check to see if there's any microphone gain you can change on your side?
I have mine on. Let me see if I can turn it on.
Yeah, it looks like we're the loudest. It will go over on this side. I think that was better.
Keep going.
Yeah, can you do more of that?
Yes, I can, except Google Hangouts keeps going with that stuff. Let me see if I can do anything about that.
Sounds like he's coming in through the wrong microphone or something.
Yeah, do you possibly have multiple audio inputs?
I do. I am on my bench. Oh, this one.
Not that one.
Is this working again?
It's louder, it's noisier.
That's worse.
This one.
Let's talk
Let's
louder.
see. I might I've got one other option here. Let me see.
Feedback.
Yeah, this might cause feedback. Let's see. Try speaking again.
Right?
And again.
Testing, testing.
Let's see. Is that enough to? Okay, try one. Ooh. Okay, try again.
Hello, testing.
Is that terrible?
It's hilarious. I think it's better.
Okay, I think that actually might be better. Let's see. Okay, so give that one last test before we commit to it.
Okay, testing, testing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think we're just setting the mic on the keyboard. Okay. So this is Dahir. Dahir's the CTO of Ravi.io, a sidewalk delivery vehicle. MIT alum and crazy smart guy who happens to know a lot about robots. So I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay, I'm gonna do I have a pretty bad echo here. Hold on a second. Sorry, it's just massively echoing on my side. Okay, I think it's better now. Okay, so hi everyone. My name's Dira. I'm CTO of Robbie.io. We make delivery robots in Palo Alto. I'm sitting here in Palo Alto right now, but I wanted to demo an open source visualization tool that I created for ROS, and why don't I just demo that? I think, are we on video here, Alan?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I am running a couple of rock dives here, and there's a bunch of topics here. What I wanted to show you is like, how many times have you thought, ARGIS is a pain in the ass? You do something like this, ROS topic, echo, scan, to see whether some sensor is encoding or whether it's not working. This was obviously not super helpful in a lot of cases, it just tells you something's working. But oftentimes firing up ARGIS to see the data is a pain in the ass. So I wrote this tool and you can use regular SSH to visualize things from within the terminal. So instead of ROS topic echo, we do ROS show, which is the tool I wrote. And I'm going to put in that scan topic, and we have a laser scan here. The terminal. You can do it. Good. Getting close right now. You can pan it around. Good. Looks like here you use the Unicode Braille character to render the dots. So what you're actually looking at is a bunch of Braille on the screen, and I realize it's a bit ironic that something that was intended for people who can't see is helping us see better. So, yeah, there you have it. Now, a lot of times we can do this, a lot of people don't have the Unicode terminal. If you don't have that, you can put a -A here for ASCII mode, and you get your here. Well, I'm doing that right there. You can see the completely pure ASCII right there. So you can do that as well. Obviously, the Unicode mode will be better. Now, there are a variety of topics, for example, if you do a 90 mode topic, what you're going to get is all the time series plots of linear angular acceleration and the yaw pitch rule. I'm getting things moving right now, but you get the idea. If you do a single variable topic, any of the standard messages that are like, flow 32, 8, whatever, you'll get a time series plot. And I think this is also not changing the good idea. You can monitor occurrence, whatever, remotely just by doing that. Now, we can also do images. So let's do that. And there you're getting video streaming right in the terminal. And if you want a higher resolution, you can just reduce your terminal font size at the expense of more bandwidth. So you can see the video is getting a bit choppy right now. But, at least you've got something. It's a lot better than looking at a bunch of numbers on the screen. And sometimes starting ARGIS up is a pinging of the terminal. So, with all the port forwards and everything. So, yeah, you can do images. You can also do code products. So, right here is a 32-channel Melodyne point cloud being rendered in the terminal, and you can actually pan and tilt it around with the arrow keys. You can zoom it with plus or minus and so on. So, yeah, we can do quite a lot with this thing. If you do a GPS topic, I don't know how many times any of you have done, if you've worked with GPSs and ROS, I don't know how many times any of you have done this, and then you cut and paste these latitude, longitude to Google Maps to see what they are. Well, you don't need to do that anymore, because you can just draw show it, and what you'll get, so you'll get is a map of where the happening. So right here we have a self-driving car driving in through California, and you can see the GPS trail on the map. You can also zoom it out, and so forth. So I think it just went off the screen there, it's going around that corner and so on. So, yeah, so there you go. I hope a lot of people will find this useful. I encourage you all to get it, play around with it. You can find it at my GitHub, which is here. So just go to the repo, download that, and play around with it. So, besides that, there's also this other tool I've been working on, which is not released yet. So ROS is released. You can download its production. You can download it and use it. There's another tool I've been working on, which is to do the same thing, not terminal, but in a web browser. So this is something that I hope to release very soon, which is basically what you do is you would run the single node on the robot, and that would act as a web server. All you would do is go into the robot and click a topic, and you'd be able to see it right on the screen like that, and be able to debug things, right from inside a web browser. So here you have IP data and so forth. Now, of course, I think one of my hopes with that is also to be able to, do it right on a phone. So, seconds go up here. So, earlier you can see in the front here, you've got a GPS map right here. You've got a laser scan right here. You can do images, point clouds, and so forth. This is not quite stable yet, but it's something I'm working on. Hopefully, it'll be released in a few weeks. So, with that, thanks. We'll take any questions. I encourage you to share this with all the ROS fans around you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Digger. That was really excellent. Were there any other questions?
How much bandwidth was that taking for the video?
Were you able to hear that?
Over the terminal, we're roughly at about 10 frames a second, and I don't know, you've got what, 80 by something of the order of 80 by 60 characters, or if you zoom that in, yeah. I'm not actually sure, but if you're doing it over Wi-Fi, it's not that much. I mean, obviously, if you scale your font down, it's going to consume a lot of bandwidth. Now, the good news, it does need differential updates. So if your video is not changing at all, then it's not going to keep updating.
Nice. Dara, we didn't see the point cloud, or I didn't. Maybe it was my angle.
It was dark.
Yeah, I think
Contrast is really dark.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, well, okay, so what you can also do, and I think, so you're probably still very local up there. There's a lot of purple and red, so it's probably a projector issue. That's what you're seeing.
I can turn the screen around.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe not able to see it on the projector remote.
So this is in monochrome mode. Obviously, if you put it on your screen, you'd have it in colors, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
Do you have support for TF?
I don't have support for TF at the moment. If you meant showing the entire TF graph, no, I don't have that at the moment, but that's a very good idea. So,
Oh no.
I also more than welcome contributions.
Gotcha. Very cool. Well, thanks so much, Tahir. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for the opportunity. I hope everyone can, benefit from this.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so I think with that, we'll take a short break, and then we'll have Lucas.
So with that low band, you can generate point cloud data. Do you want to go ahead and set up even more? Like even if you were yeah, I haven't been before. Good. We went, we competed. We did what we wanted to do, one of the requirements, right? You got an object classification and so I think like every 10 minutes. Okay. And then it does thought it was point.
But I think you're saying that if they don't know what they want, or at least some say want something, they were saying I want to take seconds. Yeah.
We'll have a laptop that just gives you. It's like the old spinning cursor that are disconnected.
We'll do a directed laptop and we'll correct it later.
Like May 7th.
Yeah, I think no. My understanding
Is that a competition? And it's to our advantage to. Sorry, yeah, you're scoring. We weren't number one. But we did score. Nope. You got 0.1 kilograms of gravel. So you're supposed to dig stuff up, because there's band. And it was 3 times 2. Yeah, so we got some. Yeah, we got basically one the stuff from our robots. Yeah, what I was reading is if you identify the right object, 5 meters. I don't know if you guys read it. So on the mechanics, then you get 1 point. Otherwise, by the end, we start off with 4, send 2 minimum points. That's it. But by the end, allow any repairs. Because, of course, if they allow in 2 to 3 mechanical, well, I'm just going to do a grid pattern and say I found everything. 3 to 4. So they said 2 team members. There's 10 items. 7 members are like the club president, administrator, and they're really a team. The question, which probably what if I have a course ready and then later different levels of commitment? Yeah.
Test 1, 2.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really helpful with this. Yeah, I got experience. Oh, no, you didn't worry about that. That's really excellent opportunity, and I'm also sad that you can work out. Okay, thank you.
Pick it up.
Exactly the same.
So what's
Hey, good to meet you.
Yeah, I had a representative.
I'm glad you weren't there because they gave me lots of things.
If I'm there, I generally need everything. Yeah.
I'm glad I didn't meet you then.
It was funny, he walked into the house.
I would say that just in a funny way.
They walked in the house to see the dog this morning. He goes, "Are you guys hungry?" Don't tell Ass's kids that. Yes, always. Yeah, so I think it's better to make your best wrong, you'll figure it out.
I have this idea in my mind that at any moment, the drones could touch us like tide or something and disable. If passing data like if you have, say, mesh, so let's say you can drop through. I probably can't carry one. Probably too heavy. Okay, 1,000. You can't carry 1,000. So there's some number of 1,000.
that can hold 10,000.
Why robots?
That's got battery.
Yeah, so this one is TT Go. So TT Go is from brand.
Could there be additional functionality
So there's two companies I know, two companies I consider Oh, okay. So their basic idea is
That's the whole idea.
Oh, here's the external. Yeah. Yeah, I just want So my YouTube friend, he does
what's the thing with the
funny specific, I don't know if you watch his videos, he's got a bunch. He did
so that's like
Oh, they're just a LED dock. There's like,
it's just a way of like plugging it in.
yeah, that's cool. So I've just been thinking of a bunch of those because it's super handy for, like, we have like, we just have war. It's just like, which customers have been talking about.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
One of the companies I just he had was able to do some kind of
There's all the other ones are like one LED. Yeah, look at it from this thing. I think it's
That's the hard thing.
Congratulations on getting into the WTIA.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we
Yeah.
really enjoyed it.
That seems really cool.
Networks, they should be back on, right? But they're ordering some parts for next year.
Cerebral like landing in here.
You don't see the runway until you.
Okay.
When you see someone, you can have those.
Cool. So,
Yeah.
And something like a 60 game.
So my name is Lucas Walter, and I want to talk about dynamic reconfigure. And does anyone use dynamic reconfigure? Know what it is? Anyone? Okay, good. I use it, or I have used it in the past extensively. And so one thing about it is I'm going to talk about it as a user interface, and I'm going to qualify that a lot. It's sort of if you're editing parameters in your code and recompiling or just running it again, it's a little bit up from that. If you have ROS params, good for you. You're on your way. And if you'd like to edit, if you'd like to change parameters live in your code as your node's running without having to restart it, dynamic reconfigure is sort of the next level up. If you're beyond that and you want user-facing stuff and you know how to do JavaScript or any other UI framework with a name and a website behind it, you should probably do that. You should stick with that. But there's sort of a niche, and maybe it's for engineers or technicians where you need to get into a node and change things, change parameters live. And yeah, basically it's native to ROS. There's not really extra dependencies, and yeah, I've used it in the past mostly for engineers and trained operators as sort of a primary user interface. That's I might be a little bit out there, and there's some issues with it that's probably make it unsuitable for that in its current form. So the dream I would have is that I wouldn't really have to ever think about user interface frameworks at all. Like if I could steer clear of those entirely, I would be totally happy. But in trying to avoid that, I've actually spent a lot of time over the past few years, probably most of it in Qt or Qt, and I decided I didn't really like that anymore. And sort of, towards the end, I have a few comments about how I got away from that. So dynamic reconfigure sort of gets to maybe this dream system where you could just say, make this parameter exposed to the outside and make it editable live. There's a few extra steps there and some boilerplate to get past. And I'm not going to actually show too much code here about that. So dynamic reconfigure, it's not a first-class ROS thing. It actually is an aggregation of, it's got ROS topics, it's got ROS services, and it's got ROS params, and I think that's all of them. Maybe I'm missing something, but fundamentally, you have a node that's telling another node to change a parameter. At the same time, they've added extra layers over that, so other nodes can get notified of that change. And there's integration with ROS params, so you can set params normally from a launch file or before you launch a node, and the dynamic reconfigure takes those and uses those as initial values. And when your node goes down, if you shut it down or it dies, all your params in their last state are still there as you last set them on the parameter server. So probably the ugliest part is editing the config files, though they're pretty simple. You have your choice from a small number of parameters, which is a good thing. And I think it's also good you can't do a whole lot. It's very limited, it's very constrained, because I think every UI framework maybe starts out simple and there's a never-ending amount of additional features that somebody wants for aesthetics or perfectly legitimate purposes, but it gets away from being simple pretty quickly. But your CFG file, you add a bunch of lines, adding different parameters, what their names are, what their range is, what their default values are. And so that config system, it gets built into C++ data structures and into Python. And it's convenient, but underneath it all is generic parameters that have names and values that are just totally generic, and you could interpret the messages and services live. You could avoid the off-the-shelf dynamic reconfigure server and client. If you wanted to, you got to conform to the interface if you expect it to work with any other dynamic reconfigure tools. But you can do something called dynamic reconfigure, which is where you could change the mins and maxes live. But you're a little bit off from the norm at that point. Server callbacks are how your nodes get updated when the parameters change. And I don't have any code here, but you register a callback. You get a message every time somebody moves a slider on the GUI or another node programmatically changes, is a dynamic reconfigure client. It makes a service call. This callback gets called. And then the server, it can totally drop what was asked of it, it can act on it right then, it can store it, and please don't sit there and do a lot of processing in the callback because the client is going to sit there and hang, which is a sort of a serious problem with dynamic reconfigure. But I'll go to the next one here. I talked about ROS params basically, but they can be set in the launch file, and if you set up your namespaces correctly, the params can go in the normal namespace within the name of the node. So it's one level down, like my node name / my parameter. The dynamic reconfigure server will load that when it boots up, and those are your default values. You can't set those parameters live, though. If you try to ROS param set any parameter that's controlled by dynamic reconfigure, it'll get ignored and be overwritten the next time a legitimate client does it properly. Synchronous server calls are terrible in dynamic reconfigure. So if things die or hang, the opposite side is left in a poor state. And I think there's band-aids to be applied with spinning things off in different threads or futures and that sort of thing. But fundamentally, I think the ROS service itself is the problem and needs maybe there is a solution in all of that without getting too deep down into how it works. But for the most part, you're stuck with trying to handle the issues on your own and make sure exceptions and other issues, and just try to avoid doing too much in the callback that could hang or could throw an exception. So the default tool is RQT dynamic reconfigure, and I'll run this live in a minute here, but you get a screen that looks like this, and it doesn't look, it's certainly not very professional looking, but I've sort of already said we're not necessarily going for professional, but you can move these sliders around, you can type in the values directly, and you can sort of misuse that. You can have parameters that are actually only pushed towards the client that you try to edit, and it'll just get overwritten and undone when you try to edit it. It's not exactly read-only, but you can sort of approximate that. And where I've gone, and this is just sort of shooting off on a tangent, is RQT is QT underneath, and I don't really want to do QT anymore. I found a tool called MGUI, and it's sort of its own little niche user interface. It's sort of inspired by a lot of what you'd call single header libraries, and these are trendy among a certain group of developers. And this one is not a single header, but it tries to be very minimal, and it's very different in character than probably any other user interface framework, because it's very raw. You're basically saying draw all this stuff every frame, and there are no callbacks. It's right there. You have to update it. You have to run it, and there's a little bit of extra stuff that's mostly taken care of for you in examples where it doesn't render anything for you. You get a list of vertices back, and you pass that to OpenGL or your other renderer of choice. And for the most part, you follow the example, and that's all done for you. But you get there's a lot of off-the-shelf widgets, and you can make your own. And because if you are using OpenGL or something like that, it could potentially be very fast to draw graphs. I don't know if you've ever tried to graph a lot of stuff in RQT plot, and even some of its successors. There's still something fundamentally slow about all of them. There's a lot of data, and why not just have that in a graphics card, which is designed to draw things if you want to plot. So that's that's all stuff. I've experimented with it a little bit. I think there's a lot more potential there. And it's not something I think an average ROS developer would ever come across. It doesn't integrate with web necessarily, although you can, people do run it in a web-like environment, because fundamentally, if you have a framework that can draw polygons, then it can run in GUI. And let's see. Yeah, I made something with it, and this sort of went back to my ROS2 experiment. It was pretty intensive. It had basically the InGUI window is designed to be rendering some 3D application. Most of the people who use it are rendering a game underneath, and the InGUI widgets are designed to float on top of that. So I made my own little OpenGL stuff with lights and projected textures and some other standard features. And the InGUI stuff was all integrated inside it, and it provided a way to change the state and monitor state of anything going on inside that program. And let's see, I want to back out of this. And we should look at, so over here, I'm going to start a few dynamic reconfigured servers. And this guy, I kind of skipped over this, but I was unhappy with the RQT standard. This is the standard RQT dynamic reconfigure. And there's a few things about it. I probably could have gone and fixed them myself, but it was, I think when I looked at the code, it looked like a little bit too much to fix, so I started from scratch. But here, these are 3 different dynamic reconfigure servers, and their controls appear over on the right. And then I can grab things, I can move them, and then this actually is down. Let's see. And the annoying thing about this is if you wanted to build a control panel out of this, nothing gets saved. And when servers go away, they sort of disappear out of this. So it's not, there's no persistence here. And what I wanted was something more like RQT image view, where you could save into an RQT perspective. Basically this, here, I can add a new one over here. I could build up a bunch of controls, not all of them dynamic reconfigure, but maybe. So with RQT, you've got a basic ability to move things around, a control panel, and you can save these and reload them and have, I've made entire applications that run off of these. And again, that's only recommended if you don't have the capability to go beyond this into something better, more integrated and better suited. But here, so this, something like this, maybe have multiple camera views. This is image view over here, so if there's an image topic, you'd have multiple ones of these. And there's sort of a somewhat twitchy way of reconfiguring things. But once you get things how you like, you can go over to perspectives over here. You can export it, and then you can even ROS launch RQT with all this stuff, and it'll basically look like this, except for, of course, this, the old RQT dynamic reconfigure. All of this stuff you have to go manually browse to the server and find the controls you want. With my version of it down here, here's all the dynamic reconfigure servers online right now, and then here's the scroll bars, and in general I made it look slightly cleaner than the off-the-shelf one. So it looks a little bit better if you were trying to make this presentable. And the main thing is whatever you set this to, you export the perspective, and it'll come right up to that server the next time you load this perspective. And, oh, and one final thing is, here's the MGUI equivalent. It's a little bit weird because it's like I have a desktop, I have widgets within a desktop, and that's just extra real estate devoted to the Windows. But there's, if I were to spend time on it, this could be, I could get rid of all this empty blue space and just have it filled up with the things I want. And I think, let's see if it's actually working. So this is example server node, and this over here is all, it's pretty much identical to the other side. It's just using the native MGUI widgets. And let's see. Yeah, so if I change the parameter over here, it's going out to the server is publishing updates out, and then this RQT-based one is seeing my changes. And that's pretty much it. Yeah. Any questions about this?
Do you try from RQT to yours?
You know, it seems like I just tried that and it wasn't going through. So I want to, let's just get this guy. And I change this, and it's not, I think it's the default setting that until you let go, it doesn't update. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's working then. So this is fully connected, but then if I do a nasty trick, like kill the servers, and actually this, my RQT widget over here, it doesn't handle this very well either. But now I'll try to change a parameter, and actually, let's see. Well, it says service call failed. That's pretty graceful. I think if I click over here, so now I'm starting to lose interactivity, and then I'm getting, I think I'm stuck in some kind of I'm stuck somehow. Maybe it's only as many times as I clicked. But that's sort of one of the nastier failure modes here.
And it locks up the whole RQT?
Well, this, actually, RQT is doing okay. I think the client is okay. Well, I think I made it out. If I tried to change this over here, mine might actually do worse. No, it's not too bad either. Okay, there I did it. And so I guess I don't really recommend my RQT dynamic reconfigure single. It needs some love and care that I'm just not devoting to it to get it to be a little more stable. I guess you could use it, and you have to use it in a very narrow way and be able to deal with some of the problems. But I think, let's see if maybe this does no better. I think that this just fails and doesn't care at all that there's no server over there. Ideally, it would update a little status thing and say that you're no longer connected to the server. So that's pretty much all I have.
And the MGUI, is that just a generic ROS node that you expose the API?
So, well, MGUI itself is it's the framework, it's the user interface framework, and it's its own thing. Normally, you would run it inside your application, and your application is probably graphically oriented. Though some people write text editors and memory debuggers and that sort of thing in it. So what I've done with MGUI ROS is put in the dynamic reconfigure stuff, so it automatically you can say, there's actually a script file that was included in the launch for it that said, go to this server, and in this window on the MGUI screen, connect to this server, and then populate all the, for every parameter that's on that server, make a little widget for it. And you can, a lot of the other stuff that's in MGUI ROS or was in the ROS 2 version was a lot else besides, not just dynamic reconfigure, like image viewers, which again, if you've ever looked at RQT image view, it seems to take up a lot of CPU. But if you get those images on your graphics card, like you're done. Like it's free essentially after that.
Sure. Thanks so much, Lucas. Cool. Well, thanks so much for coming out, everybody. If there's any announcements or lightning talks that anybody wants to do really quick, we can take a moment. And then other than that, we have the space until 9, so feel free to polish off any pizza that's left and hang out and catch up on things.
Have you done any translating when you're working on it? That's the video.
Well, I mean, so actually, this is no, this is good because that's probably their idea is to get everything onto the GPU. So they have like nodes.
Well, there's weight, it's, yeah, it uses RPC.
Okay.
ROS event driven.
Do you know if you can set up graphs and then processing?
I don't know. I've been only exploring.
If you can do that, it should be like blazing fast.
Well,
That would be awesome.
I mean, it's a lot faster.
Well, right. It's just, we gotta get the data.
But there's pipelines. Yeah. Everything you do from ROS. And there is an interface.
Right, so,
And I'm going to write, think about and to, I think, vice versa.
Yeah, so we're like taking that and programming.
That easy. It's under the jet zone. One of the.
Try that out.
Trying to learn about auto.
Yeah. Anyway, you gave it to me.
Yeah.
It's, what are the tools that you get? Does it feel like you really know what's going on in your system?
Yeah, it's coming.
Right.
It's very little. We'll see the tools, create a lot of, and that's kind of where I'm getting from the ROS side. But the problem is,
But that,
converting the image
That's what I
pipeline
did.
to
But
It's like if it's on the GPU, then you should just parameter.
Well,
I hate to have to bring it like back to the
well, like in our biz or in,
But if I change outputs,
receive or in the visualizer before
it's not as Kubernetes.
I mean, those
Kubernetes
two
service process.
Grab
So,
fresh that's
they do that, and that's, it's really early.
I have to go to the and that's fast. The way we do it.
You know, like what is it? What is actually used?
Yeah, it's all
Create a new branch, check it in.
the supervision
You get
pipeline.
some, create a pull request, you get someone else's badge.
So it's all in here, all
Once they do that, then you merge it.
and the jet team, and the jet team. So assuming the jet, big,
One big difference between the they have this full autonomous.
No one else is around.
They're not autonomous, but a full
I'll wait till
automotive
you guys
system.
Oh,
All that there.
For them, it's
tomorrow. So,
yeah.
We
wanted to display graphics and use text.
I don't know, I didn't research it too far, but I was trying to check out if you could share content, main processes,
Try and
graphics context, inhabit, like that's the.
We're kind of working on that a bit because one of our projects uses talking to Xavier.
Well, what
And
about?
doing the processing between, just doing the visualization and stitching on the nano. And then doing the.
If you're on different computers, you know already.
But it's all, yeah, you are, but it's the.
But they can see the money, you know, the LiDAR, so they're like, hey, you know, the LiDAR, I there's a way. Yeah, but someone needs to make that easy. Still, yeah.
Make a process pipeline, there's a scroll.
Would actually get at that. Some configurations Oh, really? And that's.
Nano, the memory shared.
Okay.
That's the only, that's the new one, the memory shared. That's just nano.
Yeah.
I don't know how high end it is. Xavier is still split, I'm not sure about.
Seen a present, I can't remember the company name, but starting 2 years ago, I watched a this company. It's really good. So all devices, you get an example, I think it's a parking meter, you know, and not Seattle.
Oh, like that. You get a grab it,
Yeah.
small business.
It's basically
Further down.
small, it's
Yeah, it's other than
just
just
I
I got money from somewhere.
No, they just talk about.
Exactly.
It's enough to pay for a project. But we've already got the project built. It's all about stories.
Even a guy walking
Do you have
around.
anything from NVIDIA? Are they giving you free sit-ups?
Space, like now, you know,
Well, yeah,
If you use NVIDIA.
Well, we're talking about putting the photo keyboards involved with the NVIDIA. The classification. Because you can gain about 2.5. You still a student here, or you?
I was here quite a ways back.
I would deal with a lot of MIT. They were good.
How many computers on this game?
Right now.
If you had any. No, I'm excited.
And I have no information.
in the old days.
they need to see like.
Whatever
that.
that, whatever burned onto this.
I was in aerospace.
So if your need, not just this product, if your need is bigger. Okay.
A lot of guys and I wasn't sure if it was going to I thought it looked like a pretty small place, but I think they all of a sudden they got a project and some money.
Services and things like that.
But right now, I just want to.
SpaceX really a lot of
Right now, probably one of our 10,000 spaces out there.
Vision-based
And
That means
SpaceX. Well, it's just they try. That part I knew.
People are complaining about there being up there, so.
There's a bunch of space debris and,
It's a nightmare.
60
Whenever you make a request, you gotta look at it. This account, trying to access this user. The job of authentication is to obviously there's the resources down to let that session object say, on this account, these words on that account, this is your portion.
You heard about that, project?
Set up access. We have to check to see if that user exists on the account. We can't just check to see if there's a ID field in the user account that matches. We can't just filter in a DB.
So we're trying to figure out what
No,
to do.
we have right now.
And
Go
one of the things we're
like
doing
user
is
groups, tag the groups tables, the accounts, figure out.
well, that's a good sign.
To,
If you have that user that's taking that
Demonstration.
on a group, that is
But still, 10 tons, not very much.
database allows you.
So you have to close it.
They would have
Something small or. Plus size.
Yeah, you're
Well, they have.
Yeah, I'd like to hear more of that.
You can take a look at it because I think the parameters. Isaac is robotics engineer.
I think a lot of that stems from how robotics is
Also,
So it's actually. Kind of, Raj is trying to grow up. They kind of started at the top. I mean, they started at the, level 3 autonomy. And they're into the cars.
control that we have to work with, they want us to use like
Moving
a
it down to the highest level.
which is just a package.
The two guys work together. It'll be nice, I mean, it'd be nice. Yeah, well,
They got-
it's not, I don't think it's.
Maybe there's another one.
But one of those different.
This user server has.
But that's the next.
For a specific. Because enormous.
I guess my real dream is that it could somehow be everything, like have enough CPU space, you could just do, you could leave it all choose wherever you want it, and, connect them together, and it would be all the same.
No, you have to copy it down.
So I probably like Arduino to program.
Except that, I haven't been.
specific to the management. It's a new architecture, so you're gonna build that way.
Take PCI graphics card.
I don't know, but, they've been pushing the contract.
So it's just an Arduino. Oh, yeah, that's.
How
about this? Oh, this big thing here, that's like SD card? Oh, this is the radar that was.
They have developers like.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Uh-huh.
Pretty insane. Very cool. Nice meeting you. Talk to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Come out to
See if you can get one.
Yeah.
So you're developing that iPhone?
Well, ROS is a nice integration with the camera.
I think that's where we'd be really,
Yeah.
it's not.
Before that.
Well, I kind of imagine you did it in a
And I imagine this is
Isaac specific slash.
Yeah.
And then you look at it.
Yeah.
Classification or whatever.
Yeah, so that's why I said this is welcome to the community. If they want to.
Well, I wish it would have been around 4 months ago. That thing turned out to be
Slowly,
Anyway, take care.
And so I'm saying the same thing.
Is there like a Arduino driver? Yeah. This is
I've given him signature style. I've given him
I'm actually the ghostly.
The Fleur is cool, but I'm not sure. I'm thinking about the virtual company. Well, I've got the Manical 98.6.
I'm actually, I live here.
If we can use visual and jack.
So maybe I've seen your name on.
Physically, literally, like that, because it's got the.
I'm currently working for.
This is about. This is about.
You think you're allowed to remote?
So
It's
there
well,
are things that we'll be understanding, and we can do that with like a flash. We can just have a flash go like every second.
So it's kind of how GitHub works.
Yeah, so imagine how does the flash go off this?
Oh, not the Fleur, but just a visual camera.
Oh, yeah.
So, but the Fleur will be there.
Tell me.
So.
Tell me where I'm wrong. No, okay. Because I'd love to hear.
In the virtual, we don't have to.
Actually,
Oh, you're thinking.
biggest thing I like I'm just so burnt out on dealing with my QT and like signals and so
Right, and that's,
I would say I got suckered into maintaining RQT data and reconfigure because I was so slow that I stayed it was in. I made like 3 or 4 pull requests and they went, hey,
I was thinking just of the.
you want to just maintain this, and then I pick up like 2 and thought that was an opportunity to rewrite everything, and then and so I've just been sitting there in the okay state that
Well, because it's here.
I mean,
Because
I
like this is particular competition.
I'll complain about everything.
Can't find it.
It's really,
How are you going to tell them that?
it's based, you know, it's nice. to
Oh,
have
like in a
it.
real rescue situation?
Yes.
Oh, well, then we need this.
It's kind of just good enough, you know,
I hope
now.
fun like have a lowest common fast.
Then you start to notice.
Hey Jeff, even before. We built a tool, we just called it control panel. It was really targeting exactly what you're talking about. And our business was great for the robots we were doing, but there was no good like exactly like your title sign, there's no good practice. And that's what kind of a lot of our target market is. We're doing a lot
lot of that. He's been doing a lot of demos with the camera and stuff. They are the view that they could wrap their head around in terms of this audio software.
It's persistent, and just like you were saying.
There's a lot of algorithms that you can run on audio.
And that was actually, that predated the environment there and our security can do kind of game along and figure out
There's not a lot of filters out there to cut the
yeah.
I don't know.
It's an interesting stuff.
Wait till
talk about,
you know, Max moving around, tracks a little bit.
There's not.
I'm just saying it's a machine learning problem. It's just another form of data people have been working on.
This other guy was
Using it. Same thing with audio.
doing
Just
it.
right up there, like,
Yeah.
Because they have to bring the other day. Sometimes we use the cameras, now we're doing hardware compression and things like that. It's just like an over USB, you know that ROS driver is going to decompress it from, and then recompress it probably into MJPEG or something like that, or maybe, I don't know what else.
Well, you know me, I just type code and then just compile code right now. Wait for it to compile. I think about this so that I go outside. There's a node for that, but it's not like it's just a, I don't know, RTSP or something else. It becomes a stream that they could tap into streaming videos, which is
That's fine.
cool. But there's a stream.
How far are you in commission?
I was a prototype.
Well, what else?
I do a lot of work on the infrastructure side. Right now, I'm working a lot on ROS Seattle. That's where a lot of the open robotics resources are.
Are you here at past time?
So I was actually, I haven't come to one of these meetups for, I think I was maybe here at one of them 3 years ago. It wasn't here. It was pretty custom. It may have been. We were in like a tavern somewhere.
Oh yeah, that was one of mine. So there's no company. I did it for about a year.
Okay.
And it was like, you know, I'd rather be like, so, you know, bit administrative.
So, in order to
Flaked out on that. Much nicer. You show off. Off some random projects.
would be able to slot I was working for Microsoft too.
Oh, okay.
So then we're opening.
And I don't know if you guys can work on Windows.
But all the eyes are like, what are you using also open? Rather like
Checkbox.
set of the open. Yeah. Right as I was leaving Microsoft, I know made my decision. And next to it, like, and then I saw ROS come out and that's pretty much couldn't believe it. And we, you know, we've been watching them work on it. They brought up new kind of got ROS 1 really working. I don't know, I haven't looked at much of their ROS 2 work. A lot of that ROS 2 work is coming out of robotics proper. Because it was, you know, the perfect roundup. Yeah. I don't know. Anything directly happening, but through the TSC, they have to develop of their own. They definitely have folks working on specific things.
Okay. What kind of stuff do ROS 2
all of the ROS 2 work that I've been doing has been infrastructure related and platform related. So one of the things I've been working on lately
breaking out of the Ubuntu box. I've always been a big Fedora user. There hasn't been a ton of support behind that. However, there is a large amount of motivation to support Red Hat. I'm doing a lot of things. I don't know if any of that work's going to make that cross to push CentOS Linux up to like 13 platform. Steven Ragnarok?
Yeah, I met him.
I work pretty closely.
Yeah, that's the biggest guy.
He took up the Bloom Gauntlet most recently. That's something I contributed the European generation of Bloom.
Yeah. So a lot of these things, you know, ROS too. So the whole thing I gave a talk that really fast, weird, and then I feel like I'm just going off on my own in a place where I'm not meant for me. You know, everything I do on top of me. You know, maybe like
absolutely. We've got a summer code student working right now. Trying to, he's specifically working on Windows. I don't know what precisely, but with Microsoft's recent efforts, there's a desire to get binary package out for Windows. And I think it's some Visual Studio format packaging. So we've got somebody working on that. So it's kind of given us the opportunity to revisit the whole Bloom thing.
Yes.
William wrote it. I guess it was one of his first end-to-end design projects out of school, and so it's very it was written very idealistic, and kind of there's a lot of areas where you can see quite clearly that maybe like, oh, I didn't really think this exact part of it through, and there was kind of patches and band-aids put through, extra string parsing that wasn't necessary. It's broken apart in such a way that makes it way more powerful than it used to be. And that makes it very most users invoke one command for Bloom, and there's like 10 different binaries that you can invoke, invoke and change and stuff like that. So we've been talking about revisiting the whole story. There was another parallel. I think Gen 2, they were trying to use Gen 2 package, and that takes the opposite approach of instead of each individual developer invoking Bloom and updating the repository, it's like a centralized approach. Like, all right, we're ready to release internal, run Superflora and release all of that. Generate the individual package and Debian files.
It could be a little more like me as a maintainer. I released one years ago, and it's still substantially the same. And I went through it.
That's pretty much
like all this wall of script. Yeah. I have no idea what's going on or how it comes out. And it worked out. It was fine, but I just, you know, it just didn't. It wasn't inspiring. When should you do this? No, I just get phone packages and bunches of stuff. I can do that with my
Kind of extended my
that's where I land. I'd like there to be a place, especially, and it seems like a disconnect when people ask about this because the answer is there, it's problem, and it's done, it's just a team, and competition. Yeah, the thing I want is I want to release my own proprietary stuff, my own private, he's like the most useful person. I don't want to go out on the internet. So see the experts of data locally created things out to them as I see them. And it seems like it
definitely should. And I think the response you're going to hear from probably Steven is, oh, you can make your own ROS code farm instance. And
I tried that.
Yeah, like get ready to like drown in Java stuff and like.
And it was, and I could just tell people ask for help. Yeah, there's this interconnect people that I breathe really well. So there's not a lot of, there's not like a nice continuum of like, oh no, a little bit, everyone will just help the person next to them like that. That exists for us. These little, walled gardens within that.
Yeah, no, and that's a good way to put it. There's significant amount of there's a lot of wading through the code, yeah.
Yeah, it's all open in there, it's still, it's a big group.
Yeah.
And you start to realize, what am I doing? Like I know this isn't like how I like to be doing
Yeah, I mean, I got my degree in robotics, and I haven't done any robotics in open robotics yet. You know, it's like trying to just it's all software engineering, classic software engineering.
Right. Well, that's sort of everybody for them who didn't go out and do a startup and stay. That's what they're doing, which is, it's fantastic. So it's so frustrating. It's almost like IT. It basically is. It's IT for robotics.
It's not wrong.
Yeah, it is. It's not man, I don't want to do that stuff. It's incredibly lazy.
How do you no, we get to see and play with cool robots quite often.
Yeah, you're up to the center of which is good. Yeah, ROS too. Like my issue there was
How many events
I don't know, maybe the same thing. Like DDS doesn't seem like an intra-process low-cost solution. And maybe for different architectures, maybe just got serious tons of basically designing applications.
Like a protocol requires actually
bunch of nodes and processes.
Oh wow, how did you pick up these?
It worked pretty good. Good enough.
Well, you switched, right?
And then in ROS 2.
So pretty much
Gotta be the
design
same
so
I would definitely.
Well, yeah, of course. But it's, what I'm saying is not hard.
Because I have to keep my own robotics. I'm also like brand new to ROS too, so I'm hitting like almost the same frustration that I want to
Okay. And I don't know, like there was a guy
and then the power of like
complained endlessly.
like that's real good flows.
I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
I haven't.
And I feel like we're kind of stuck in the middle too right now, because like ROS 1 is not.
That's like 90% of things
That's just, it's not what it needs to be for industry, and it makes sense that like this productizing ROS 1 is hard. Certifying it for safety is, basically impossible. And I understand the desire for something else. It's almost like maybe we being the ROS community swung a little bit far in the other direction. It's almost very industrial now, and it's not the barrier to entry for the community as a whole has been raised quite a lot.
Yeah. And so you're gonna do maybe 5 you can't tell you get to learn 2 things.
There's no master, except when there's a master.
Yeah.
So I have essentially two.
Yeah.
And I think I'm sure it'll get there eventually. I wish people would say something. I know that one of the coaches for me, it wasn't ready.
Well, I started working on the thing, like, my first prototype was made last year.
I sort of imagine there needs to be.
So that's to just kind of
Like DDS.
So this version.
Oh yeah, and that's something that I struggle with with ROS 1.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, for sure. It's like, well, switch to UDP, and then that's got its own. Yeah, exactly.
it was always struggles, and I always found that the solution was always throw money at the problem, really, really, really nice network devices. We were getting nice Cisco PoE access points, get them all over the place, all the end draft standards out, let's get the end cards on all of the robots, so that we can point cloud and TF better. And yeah, I understand the need for QoS, and then at the same time, and that's even just QoS has just been crushing me because of the mismatches on each side of ROS2, and it added another layer of complexity to the whole thing. As much as, the XMLR in the ROS1 wire protocol had its downsides, it couldn't work quite a lot.
So I can essentially design
Smart people have been working on this.
Right. You can add more tools, you can do.
I want there to be maybe a solution that could use that without it being ROS1.
Well,
Somehow ROS2 maybe needs to.
I think ROS
Have that inside.
was difficult for me to learn.
Maybe that's a huge taking a long time.
I guess when I take a step back, it's almost like,
Learning new packages.
just being able to,
Now they know how to do it.
ROS1, they kind of went out of their way and designed this wire protocol. It's really kind of solid. Well, is a solid field now, and PDS is kind of so I can understand the desire to just kind of stick to what makes ROS. Let's get back to what the community needs, the infrastructure, and all that kind of stuff. Let's let somebody else take care of this wire protocol.
So we'll just have some package.
At the same time, I think what we're seeing is that
And then you
we now involve an extra party. And it's like now you're dealing with digital communications with Open Robotics and the ROS community coordinating and working on their projects. And then we've got this other private companies involved, these TDS implementations that are like.
My visibility on those.
Oh yeah,
I have no model in my head.
And there's these massive code bases, these TDS vendors. I don't know how to bug their code.
Everything's there already, all the explanations figured out.
We have to kind of like mesh our priorities with their priorities and find their bugs.
Control the server motors. There is like a way to do server motors with the.
And that reflects poorly on us too, when we're having trouble with those.
So it's all already developed.
That's something that I've been struggling with. That's not actually a ROS2 problem. This RMW vendor, you could try a different RMW vendor, or you could, you could.
Play with the QoS.
It's just
something saying.
So yes, there's just so many extra layers of complexity.
I want that to be there for when I need it, but I don't want to need it
essentially like all the high levels.
There's also, I think, a lot of the industry is really kind of
quite experienced.
they're the ones that are funding a significant amount of the ROS2 development. So I think it kind of makes sense that a lot of the features that are being targeted are so support their efforts.
Right.
To me, like
and I think that's maybe in terms of like what's
like building
and what
very
is expected
and then most of them
moving over to a ROS2 platform.
behavior
Our business is a great tool. If you're developing a self-driving car for industry, many of our business not necessarily regarded. They have their own set of tools, I guess, displays. And so maybe it's lacking. And we just don't even have visibility into that. Well, it's kind of a chicken and egg, of course. It's not people on the platform to really have that voice be heard.
I'd like to see, some of the things are quantifiable, for yours, but maybe are not. I wish there could be benchmarks for the things I want. And I wish someone would go out and publish these so that people would acknowledge this basic thing. Maybe that's, as long as that's not
Conceptual. Setting up
It would be nice if they sort of acknowledge. I mean, they do. I mean, they are.
All I wanna know is.
But it's hard to go from there and then see and everything's fine.
Yeah, well, especially when you get that many big name companies and that much corporate in a room, like the technical security committee, like it's hard to avoid that kind of feeling that kind of branding coming through. Yeah. And then I think it's also more difficult, just the stage that it's in. There are a lot of those bugs that are undiscovered or no issues, and then you have to wade through all of them and find them, and then, I personally struggle with, I'm having this issue, I don't wanna look through the 47, issues that are open against RMW, yes, when really the problem could be, the issue could be filed on any variety of these middleware, repositories, and it's hard to wade through all of the work that is we know needs to happen. Yeah, interesting perspectives. Well, in any case, if you're ever interested in powwowing and really nailing down a good fault tolerant RQT or otherwise solution there, I would be open to it. But I just didn't want I don't like to shoot an email. I think I've seen it on GitHub. But in any case, again, echoing a lot of your feelings of just not wanting to deal with it, especially with possibly being like one of the bigger or possibly final ROS 1 releases, depending on who you ask and what percentage you take. I think maybe that would be a good target for really cleaning up a good solution. Whatever form that takes.
Yeah, I stuck my neck out on this probably in the last year, and maybe, and I don't know. It's hard to tell other people to do stuff for free, and it wasn't I wish it received super well. Yeah, maybe more behind closed doors is the right way. Or just in a safer, smaller right way to come at it. I don't know if it's the default setting, but I think this goes everywhere. I think I see
It's a fire very useless. Yeah, for a while I was even still signed up for the ROS distribution list, so I was getting that fire hose twice. Oh my gosh, that looks like telling.
Yeah, if there's resources to figure out the future. If I thought there was nothing was going to happen, I'd probably just
and one of the things I wanted because
some vision, some ability to evolve. That'd be nice.
Are you working with someone who's written?
Put my 2 cents in and probably pull the guys sort of thing. I just trickle on it.
My thing,
That's your part.
There's a lot of times
You're getting grant money and if you
I figure in general never really needed to be said in terms of like what happens when you're dragging your slider bar back and forth. Like it's continuous updates to the dynamic reconfigure server really the right move. It is for a lot of people. Maybe you're
calling ROS service.
Yeah, and if you're maybe like muted or something like that, maybe that's kind of nice to be able to get that immediate feedback. But if you're updating a value in the EEPROM of your motor controller, spraying that value over there is that could different things. And so trying to balance those two voices, those two loud voices.
I was talking about this temptation. Let's add another option. Let's add another configuration. Let's make everyone happy.
And that's the solution I tried to implement. Or whatever years ago, I right click on like those widgets, threw some checkboxes in there, and some of that behavior, I could see that getting out of hand right away. A lot of voices chiming in. Hard to balance those resources. And it's like you said too, I didn't write there. It was like a lot of it just doesn't make a lot of sense the way it's structured. That a wholesale rewrite might even be more time efficient than trying to handle some of these features.
It's hard to. Because especially, it should be more public facing. Level. You can't have this thing so craft.
The idea is to get that
Although,
story together.
it seems like that's what it's in ROS too, right? That's what it got.
What we talk about is investors or basically anyone that.
It's almost like the intent was to take the same developer experience and simulate it. You know, just take out the faster, and other than that, it just kind of everything is the same. Yeah, it's just not quite.
Even if we don't see you for another.
Because if you ask a lot of the folks that robotics dashing earlier this year coming up,
Good to see you. I'm glad that hopefully.
Good luck with the grant writing.
I'm really good at a lot. There's a lot of developer.
All right, take your down.
There's still a lot of stuff that I expect to be working that's not.
Oh, yeah. Hey, issues. Knock down.
I'm a student.
I think the biggest problem right now is that we're doing a great job of enumerating all these issues, or like never having time to address them. There's a workaround. Before you know it, you're working on there's a workaround, there's something in your workaround.
No, it's still.
We'll see. 2 feet. Yeah. I feel so. And hoping that you can totalize some of that travel. That's one of the things we use for having a lot of stuff.
I was listening to you score points for at times, there's a lot of resources. This year, but it's so good that they got this thing.
So for Thomas, right, you probably using
It's not finished.
That's what I did. I've actually been working on
sometimes they like this.
That's I think they're not washers, but here's a whole list of like things that giving you resistance. Maybe I'm by the way, that's crazy. Like they're all just like things that
So the goal though,
and it was like it was way bigger than what I
goal is that
that was like you can
pair like and you can actually have
maybe this is the story isn't quite as where we
the goal is to have a mesh network.
but I think these
what
kind of setting do you imagine using that?
Apply on skill. So for example,
like that. It's
the problem we have
right now.
my thought is that actually
I'm hoping this is going to be done this whole like let's actually
develop something. Make some UI for robots. That's what we're doing like stuff.
Right. We'll see.
There's a lot of things
Where I start something, that's perfect. If you zoom out, I use ROS.
And I think
I'm actually using on the web. Webcam would jump in, make a live instead of thought is you have a lot of
maybe some of these issues.
Right. Tapping the bottom. How do you get the traditional tap? It's not like it's not in the past when the mechanical videos open the thing. This is mechanical. Now there's software too. So how do you have that? Imagine when the
I told him about like,
We'll see what,
publishing.
I feel like,
You actually do a
2.5 weeks after dashing ships, I can really scratch people's ears. I'll have more to say on that subject. Yeah.
So that you can actually.
When it comes to the, like, the ship cycle chaos, too, I feel.
But I'm actually
Right,
seeing
actually
some
looking at that.
Not
People
all
program at a certain
Yeah.
point, so the transition stage between the ship, there's a lot of bugs.
I know,
Like
yeah.
those bugs are no longer bugs, they're
And you give them the key,
documentation
you
problems,
actually.
are we doing some back? That whole like, the way the ship is happening, the ship is sailing.
Check that one, hey, does that have a mission? And if he does, then yeah, then he can do stuff. He cannot, well, she's like,
You know, it's got
right,
all
so
those
just have those.
Yeah,
It's like,
hey,
hey,
I
go
was looking
squad.
forward to these new features.
I think a robot.
Just like this.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much to know about my house. I need to get to the systems.
You mean that's a hope, right? That's what we just.
Right.
Okay,
well.
Yeah,
writing down the
people
password.
like
You could share some, you could brainstorm all night about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, all of those, and I'm.
Well, we talked about that. See you guys. Take care.
In
so bad.
in this.
You probably won't fit it,
method,
but
right? There are three of them.
Oh
You can find it. Yeah, there's
Just like incubators, I mean, like place where I can actually.
That's
so
like
so around.
Yeah.
I heard about that.
My place, my home,
There's a
my
team
apartment will
I know.
sound.
And it's
I need like.
damage
Yeah.
to the
Practically,
world.
I'm
You
going
can
to
literally
the
take the
compost.
arm and squash them.
Right.
Well, actually, that, nonetheless, we should
Yeah.
kind of picture the.
It's so predictable.
Yeah.
So predictable. I think
Well, I mean,
Windows would be pretty good.
You can also set the
This
same.
is- I mean, you're at
and
the front phase for Windows 10.
Some cute Android
They don't even have to do biotech.
right?
But if they
A
don't.
lot of Android like to be right, so that
Uh-huh.
you can.
Yeah, it's really expensive.
Really? I didn't know
I
that.
think it's not like.
That's what they sell.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
You don't want to.
Yeah.
I
Uh-huh.
think it's
Well, it's
very,
interesting
I
because,
was personally never invested in biotech.
I went to the
Working in
studio.
biotech myself.
No, we didn't.
I would never invest in biotech.
Why not?
It's just like
Because it's all
making
like pure
construction.
dumb
Yeah,
based.
yeah.
It's like there are like
10
millions of
different
dimensions
physical
of parameters every experiment, and you actually stumble to the right of those million coordinates. You get success. Or like with doing
That makes a difference,
massive,
right?
massive like parallel
There's
experiments with
no
like
wireless
all
access.
obvious automated.
That just changes the whole model.
So if I invest in biotech, I will
I
first see
think
how much
I love
automated
structure thing.
how many iterations they're able to do, how many of the parallel experiments they can run, and I will do make less than like probably something like that. I'm serious, there are like ways to do like trillion or like billion of samples simultaneously. There are like methods, but not many.
Yeah.
Where they take it and
Instead, like biotech is
and none
working
of
like,
the
oh, let's
protocols
try
they
this
have
experiment, build like 50 stages of the
Yeah.
experiment and
There's
it
so
all
many,
goes wrong.
items.
So that's like 99% of
It's the thing though, they only work on
they
data.
will all
They
fail
don't
unless,
actually know where the
like,
action. Wow.
except for
So,
the few
even
who
though
like
it is,
by
it
double
is,
stumble
it takes
actually
time.
into the right
Sense
of
of
that
action to it. And now the
hyperdimensional space. And sell this, of course, because it's so rare. They will sell it for billions of dollars because it's like a drug,
exactly
even
what it
like
is, right?
minor drug, like
It's fun
my
for you,
successful
right?
drug will be sold by billions.
Oh, yeah.
And they will be everywhere in news. They will excite everybody,
I know, I mean,
newcomers
it's
to
not
the
funny,
biologies. They
No.
will think, oh, I will also be a millionaire, and will never like care about like 80,000 other people with high education, PhDs, who never stumble in the right
I just got you like that.
space and
Nice.
have to do that.
Right.
Work in the McDonald's or
I think.
or
I don't
more
believe
like
it.
the Starbucks.
Starbucks.
No, this is a natural career path for this.
Right.
Samurai's path and that was dog path.
Did you do science then?
No, I actually do a.
That's how it is.
Okay.
And if you're a white, you will not stumble.
Yeah, like, that's why I have
You will
like,
not like
I do a bunch
make
of, I
rational
do a bunch of
decisions.
invention.
Yeah.
I'm like watching that going to
They
be
keep getting scooped, so it seems like there's definitely just a popular direction.
Not a lot of hardware stuff, yeah.
again,
Yeah.
again, it's pretty much someone
That's what I would
who
love
like
with,
a bit lucky, like sometimes.
Yeah, so what
Like just the whole concept of like.
I hear about that. That
someone
sounds
produces,
nice.
like, arrays of
Like,
results.
the promise of it is
And they can
nice.
publish.
Yeah,
it.
so right now, the way this works, right,
Or
is you,
visual results.
before you have
And
the
they take,
big
like,
picture,
yeah,
you actually do a handshake
Right.
with.
Yeah, exactly. The first one will be in like nature, let's say, another one will be second time.
Yeah,
Yes.
and there's another thing.
I would say they will become professor, but this is a lie. They will not
Yeah.
become professor as well. You need
That's
an
it, yeah.
enterprise now
That one,
yeah.
to become
Now,
professor.
Windows, right?
Like
you
there are
share
like,
two lines of
what,
server.
900
So
positions every year,
or this guy.
and 80,000 postdocs to teach. So that is the,
Well,
like, so
another
like,
way
the ones who
That's
are
actually
cooking
So
there,
ROS name.
that's what your
So,
wife is facing
using
after
Ethereum, right?
I mean, I know this number because I just did market research. I know how many labs, 40,000 labs total in US, including the, including even the lab, 9,000 of
I
lab
was able
testing
to
labs.
actually.
So it's not even all scientific labs. Many of them are just environmental testing labs. They don't have professors per se. Well, it's
So now you really research that third-party
then
server.
it's probably will be
Well,
like
it's already
some
become the decentralized network.
any,
Okay.
any
So,
flavor, right?
is-
And
has
then
proprietary-
like
Yeah.
environmental
Yes,
and then the quality control for the factory, which I don't know the order.
Interesting.
I would say the top probably scientific lab actually. I would maybe guess like 10 to
That was
20,000, which nobody actually knows the numbers.
Got it.
Academia doesn't never publish
One of the
it.
stuff
Because
Well,
all the core will be
Um,
so pretty much, if you even
I like
accept
embedded
like
systems.
40,000 research lab,
I'm thinking about doing
tomorrow
some
every professor
alternative
will go
towards
to
automotive.
yeah. Only a couple of postdocs can get
For our robotics project, I did
which
some
they are
low-level
prepared.
numbers.
Yeah, postdoc is like preliminary position, it's like temporary position before you can become professor. That is the definition of postdoc. And that is
I feel
the
like actually those numbers are starting with success rates.
What kind of
you know,
what
like
kind of robots do you
success
want to
rate
work
for
on?
this program is 30 to 40%.
Or the kind of
Estimated success rate for like any NIH
massive
grant
growth.
for science is like below 5%.
Yeah, massive growth.
Massive growth?
Like success rate for the grant, which is exactly
Well,
designed
not really company-wise, but like
from
being
professor.
with
Like there are 10
Uh-huh.
awards. There's not even percent.
Okay, that would be the coolest robot.
Maybe like
The
10
robotics
awards
together
per
robot.
award.
I think you
From
would
like
need
80,000
machinery.
nobody's points in percent.
my division.
So it's like
Uh-huh.
how many like sign up.
Robot that is very individual.
So obviously,
You can.
it's more likely that you're getting a Nobel committee, not winning, but like getting a consideration. Yes, it's more
It
likely
doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be
than
myself.
actually.
Because when a bot has done its job,
The process is like you
eventually over time,
the
they have the
like
trouble down.
groundbreaking technology. Like
So
sometimes
you don't have to
by
have massive
like CRISPR,
replication
sometimes
scheme,
like doing it
but you can have a
like with your brain like PCR,
like switch them.
switch
for
them.
the
So instead of having them doing the same job, you can do the job, right? Because right now, you can see downstairs right now.
then you
From the Tesla is trying to
publish
solve
it.
Uber as well.
Then like based on the publication you become a professor. And when the model was going to
Yeah,
It's
die,
great, literally.
No, that's true, right?
It's stupid.
Uh-huh.
All the cars.
That's a
That's
cool
the process.
idea,
Yeah.
right? Like,
which by the way, Nobel Prize, which sometime
He's
Marie
actually.
Curie would like live and work and
Oh,
have
okay.
a lab
Yeah,
for
yeah,
like
yeah.
entire like 20 years.
I saw it.
I think
You're
her
right,
first
yeah.
Nobel Prize. She didn't
Okay.
get any grant, she got Nobel Prize.
So
For
that's
20
also
years
the
she was
CNC.
funding her lab,
You said
she
you
was
were
running
running
for Nobel Prize, yes. And then she won another
That's
one
cool.
for
That
another
makes
20
sense,
years.
right?
So now, you cannot buy even an apartment in Seattle.
Yes.
I mean, they obviously like, they are like,
It's like.
that time it was $1 million and now it's $1 million. It was lost all their like financial.
The trash bucket.
That was the point, right? Is you get
Yeah,
this
yeah,
prize,
yeah.
you do, you know, you're doing the right thing, you go do that.
Exactly, it was the original purpose. Now it's not any longer at all.
No, but
It's
what
like, no, like, what would you do when you're 90 years old? Like,
Driving cars,
no,
it makes money, it's,
That was on the other hand, like,
it's real. My biggest problem with robotics is that
So
I see
very
lots of
creative
people who are very
experience
experienced
is
in
what
robotics,
was
and then
expected.
they
Yeah,
go
that's-
create
she was like doing it
a
right.
company where they produce
She
a
did it
robot.
right.
But then I think they produce a company based on what they're able to do
Although she was also
technologically,
from the
but it
Robotics
seems like
Operating
they're not
System.
general enough, or like outside
most
of
of
the
the time.
manufacturing sector, I feel like a lot of people produce them and they don't reach as wide of a potential as I would hope for.
Yeah.
Because they don't have the
I dare not
level of being
bring up
generic.
the statistics.
A lot of time when you ask
Actually, you know what?
the customer
If
says,
she knows,
"Oh,
it's
so
great,
you
but
can-
I hope she's not like making any
There's no efficiency.
right, she will talk to herself
But yeah.
about
Yeah.
honestly,
Thomas,
I am
what do you think
not
about
the
Thomas?
competition
Because,
like
so,
in
personally,
terms of like I
China
will not
had a
participate.
service by having my one.
And okay,
Oh, they do?
if it is let's say for the
One of the
like
things that been testing around,
like
which is like a highway very similar to one like white plane.
Oh,
And they call it
reaching
Oh,
for
really?
bright color.
Uh-huh.
And then I think they also do something with the highlights so that it changes color during the night. So
Especially like when,
so you know, it's
Keep
very
places
yeah,
that
yeah. So it's very
shots
similar to
take place
Uh-huh.
that are
So
the most prestigious
so the autonomous car
places
is
also
full
are
of people doesn't it will never have to
That's another
it is a
thing,
highway
yes,
so that if
never,
anything
like-
else come into it, well
Never, like,
you're violating
right
the
there.
law.
Okay.
So
like
It solves it that way.
The best place
Which
to
is the same as the
start
bus.
was
Same as
like
the
where
bus.
this like
Right.
by definition
and
is where
train.
the company
Yeah.
start.
You know, I would not run in front of the bus driver.
I know, right?
Sure.
Which is why I think autonomous cars
Like
should
you probably live
really
in the lab like
like the complicated part of
I don't
autonomous
know,
car
we don't have to-
seems to be
Like I was really excited about
the concept of making people get
San Francisco.
car
Uh-huh.
in institution.
Yeah.
Because right now, because we own a car,
Right.
that's why we
There is a
don't really
proof
care
of
about autonomous.
Oh, yes, I've seen the car.
Yeah, I
Imagine you
actually
have both,
I rented
car,
the
so that the roads
I
will
I
literally
went one time and I stayed
that
in
was your
the
livable space.
hostel, which
The bus is already
turned
taken off,
out
so
to
you're
be
ready.
kind of
You have the bus.
Oh,
Yeah.
and I was like in the middle of it.
That's true.
And I went
I don't
to,
know, that's my
because I needed to do
Right.
It's not hard.
business with my
I felt like
embassy,
before,
Ukrainian embassy,
You
which
would even change.
turned out
the
also
way
to
that
be in the
someone have to come in.
So I ended nearby,
I think we
close to the
Oh,
yeah, and I walked through this, upon like cross the entire scene, like, I'm like, and that's like the moment I was
Because
like,
right
every step I become more and more
that guy
socialist.
on YouTube.
And every step I could see how I change my
We have a
life
single
becoming
thing
more
that's
socialistic. And how I hate to the newbies and like things and how to each
So it's suck. I think.
how horribly I want to
I think
punish
we feel like we
newbies
invent
every
cars
my
too
step.
early.
Too early.
We make autonomous cars. And then
I came back as a different
There's a hilarious scene on Star Trek, actually. That's exactly in the Tiburon.
They just labeled the roads, you know, did something real quick, then
It's like one of
maybe
the
they could do
captains who like
autonomous
knows history, and they somehow like got
Yeah.
sent back in
Right.
time.
Oh.
But
year two.
the only problem with that is that
Right.
they
Everyone.
And they're
kind
like,
of
yes,
slash
this is like
job,
man,
the bus
that's
driver.
the other
And that is
people
one of the
like
things.
on the street.
The thing though is the bus job is actually very, it's
No,
not
good thing we're
at all.
civil.
It's pretty shit.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people need it.
That's right.
There's a lot of low paying job people who want.
Right. That's the biggest
I see
issue that I have with robotics.
And like, her apartment was literally like on the corner.
I mean, I'm also
across
a computer
the corner,
science, so
like,
that business is
across the
also
street.
massive.
There's a pizza shop, right? Like, walking to the pizza shop at 10 o'clock, you're gonna be offered drugs 8 different times. Like, we don't want hard drugs.
It's like that, everything you made it.
It's like you've been
The
outside
value
for
of
30
being
seconds.
It was some different than Halloween. Nobody offered me drugs. Many people asked me for money.
Okay.
Hopefully.
It's obviously.
Well, it was late at night, so I feel like that.
Okay,
It was no
something
longer asking for money, right?
Yeah.
You know, imagine Bill Gates alive. What happened to him?
Do you think it'd be good or bad?
Okay,
I
yeah,
don't know.
thanks
That
for
would be
chatting.
a-
I
It's like when Bill Gates died, you have a wealth of what, 10 years,
Something like that?
yeah, literally floating in. Someone's gonna grab that.
Yeah, it would be.
There was a guy there that was actually saying, you can't say that, you can't say that, you can't say that.
Come on, God, noticing shit though.
The whole conference fell apart because
What do you think?
did a lot.
He did a lot.
That's amazing, that's actually.
Hey, this guy, this is like, Tom, I just go in, he got it.
Was it-
What? I didn't know that shit.
Oh, yeah.
So now,
No, they sell the doing something here.
Yeah.
Kind of like some stuff here.
oh,
You want to hear what we go for.
yeah, so like that's where it died.
I mean, we've been drinking one of those.
Oh, you always, okay, you switch between the,
I don't know, we just read the bar.
What studio camera is this?
I don't know, something that picked up a lot. It works pretty well. The only problem is one image.
Oh, yeah, because it's
Yeah,
double
you
wide.
cross it.
At least it's synchronized.
Oh, yeah.
That is, that does the same.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the chat. You can't run.
Yeah. Driver's scope is that
Oh, awesome.
specifically. So,
Yeah, the
I was gonna try to-
I bought a Z and then I did, like, I bought a Z when they came out before graphics could fit onto robots. I feel like, yeah, the Z came out like 5 or 6 years ago now, so there were not small single board computers like.
Oh, the Z's are big. I mean,
Yeah, no,
we've got a real set 435 and another, because it's got an IU built into it, gives you the video and it also gives an I2C stream of, angle data.
Turn that into TF.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. Well, the IU is for the camera, so you know what you look at. You got reference to what you look at. But it's pretty cool. But the array of stuff, one of the array we're building, the other project, it's got synchronized color cameras and it's digital cameras. 4K, well, the idea is 4K for like $2 grand a piece. So, but the lower resolution, I think the HD for that's it. After we redesign it, the parcel.
Is it a hobby project or?
No, well, these are just the words that we need for something, another project. So, experiment on a small scale. Always want to play with jets, work with it now. Do really work with
Oh, yeah.
Are you using a special board image or create it yourself?
or what,
For the Jetsons? Did you just start?
Well, no, we start with a base image and we just build up from there.
Okay,
I mean, this one just has a straight jet line.
okay, there wasn't
But
anything.
this one's built with an Isaac.
Okay,
It's actually got Isaac and ROS.
but you could install
How
Isaac.
long is Isaac now? Or is it?
The Pythons are very much a work in progress. The C interface is pretty good. C++.
I mean, are there enough drivers?
There's a lot of, well, everything on here is got drivers.
And that's
I still haven't gotten the AWM board to work with Isaac. There's drivers for this. But there's drivers for this.
It's not like 40,000 drivers like this.
There's a lot of stuff. I mean, it's like 50 pages long. Supporting process.
Mostly video that made them, or these?
No, all the boards, all the different interface boards, all the different, motor drivers. And so forth. Like I said, this board's designed, it's not designed, it's one of the great jetbot boards made of. I2C interfaces, all the major Raspberry. It's a Raspberry Pi family. Just add this.
Oh, right.
Anything works on a Pi works on a Jetson. Can be.
Oh, that's smart design. That's probably the first thing they said.
No, because we've got there's a little LCD screen on here. It just plugs right in and it works.
another thing that you control is the image recognition. How do you control it? Like, does it do image recognition or some sort of navigation?
Oh, well, it will be. I mean, it's nothing set up right now. That's the idea. The JetBot's basic for the, like I said, 2 days demo, has all our baseline capability that we built. We just play around with it. You have to do image processing.
It'd be pretty cool to hear Isaac talk sometime.
Well, not for me. I don't know anywhere near about 5. I'm not
it is a very, very hard process, but it is parallel.
And, oh, like, you still need it, or?
You don't.
But you
But
must
it is
have
for
it.
real time.
You must have an NVIDIA processor.
Not this, no, run it on a, well, it's code, I mean, you can build it.
So, I mean, a lot of the things that the selling, the marketing materials, makes it sound like it's but it doesn't, I haven't gotten into it myself.
I haven't built it on a non-GPU system, for sure. We're running a PC with a GPU, with a 10 GPU. But I don't know if we'll run without it. We could, we've got a work process. We have the AMD GPU. See that way.
Does it have command line to it, sort of like?
Yes.
Okay.
It uses, oh man, it uses common code. I can't remember the code. It's pretty well documented.
Oh, yeah.
The NVIDIA developers.
Okay, cool. They're showing off themselves.
Well, they've got a dual pipeline for the Jetsons, a PC pipeline and a slating PC working with the Jetson work.
Okay.
And they're not using or they renamed PC tool as SDK manager to be able to install everything and then push it down to the Jetson boards.
But are they sending messages of TCP/IP across?
I think it's all SDK.
Well, so that was the big technical, at least I read one of the technical books, which was, they said the problem they're solving is moving video data. Most efficiently for IP.
Oh, ROS doesn't do it very efficiently.
Yeah, so they were saying that they started with how do you natively move around images and video on a, or anything you want to do ML on.
Yeah.
Graphics pipeline efficient.
On a single system.
And then they extrapolated from there, so I don't know how far they went. I don't know if they have like ML.
I looked at the multi-processor, like we were talking about how they, multi-CPU, how they interact. Like the ROS is pretty straightforward, but I haven't actually looked it out.
That might be outside of the NVIDIA stuff, that might be some other
No, it's in
solution.
there, I know it's in there, but I just don't know, I haven't explored how to do it. Because like the project Eric and I worked on, one of the parts, we were trying to run the simulator action on a PC, on a Windows PC, because I still haven't figured out how they did this. I don't know if you have, but they had Windows Unity running on a Linux box
Okay.
as a simulation engine. And the frame rate was a third of what you get on the PC, was running
But doesn't Unity have Linux support?
No, not the whole group. I mean, it was running as DLLs.
Oh, yeah, that's not.
So I don't know how they did it, but they did. They got it working.
Yeah. But it's sort of a hack.
Yeah, it was definitely a hack. And we were running in all kinds of problems. It was running in 1080i. This thing should be running in 60 frames per second. And it was doing like 20.
For what we were doing, there was a simulator.
It had to be.
It
It was Unity specific NVIDIA. We even tried running it at ROS Seattle on AMD and it wouldn't run.
That's
Like,
the environment you run on.
You couldn't get the OpenCL version of Unity at all. I'll bring a look. One of the things I was going to do, and I might still do it, is try to port their simulator over to Unity Windows from the Unity project side instead of just
Why
running.
don't you try to use Godot?
The Godot engine.
Yeah. Oh, the rendering engine just got
It wasn't our choice. I mean,
But
it's
they actually.
my choice of simulator was
Yeah,
definitely.
okay, and also custom render too. You can actually add like a custom engine rendering engine.
I can look into it after that, it's very interesting.
Yeah, we can work on these things. Still gotta build the power system.
Have you actually used it? No, but
We're
I
just keeping track.
I'm pretty
I think I'll figure out.
No, that one's gonna take 3 regulators. Because there's actually 3 different voltage forms.
The big thing I'm waiting for now is more tooling. The amount of tooling it has is not compatible with.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, I mean, real and
And to get maximum power of the jets, I gotta feed it to 3 more circuits.
So, I've heard good things about it. I feel like I'm.
So I need 2 3 amps, 5 volt regulators, and 1.
I'm sort of in the market for a simulation framework, like to.
This one runs off of 12 volt and the
You know, you said that, I was thinking, well, you know,
The C++ stack is on,
Raspberry Pi, you know, 3.3.
okay, from one which is Postgres to 10 which is the reason why the first one that uses definition is very, they have very detailed definition, but a lot of times it's not very useful. It's not very useful. You use it at night because every single thing has some kind of example.
Sure.
And same with Unity too. Unity has that kind of
Is there a good exchange style community that's?
They have a
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that's where you go for help.
That's where I mainly go, asking questions and stuff. It's a huge community, right? A lot of people jump.
Yeah, I know a lot of people use it. They all just sort of keep to themselves.
Not really. If they do, then well. But we have that Discord. They also do a bunch of video, like stream every week. That and also there's also you know the
2.5 amps, and you run, that's
just cycle flow. I think it's just like
it's sort of a knockoff thing you can post anywhere.
I think it's cycle flow actually did it for them or something, right? Because cycle flow actually had to get
It's like the answers.ros.
Yeah.
That's a knockoff.
Yeah.
It works great.
Yeah, it works.
I wish it was Stack Overflow so all my karma would commingle and accumulate.
The good thing about Unreal is answer verbs catch later. So you see your project use local side.
Yes.
Because it catches the catching almost everything so 3D stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's very good at that. And unlike Unity, right, when everything was kind of so Unity had a very slowish. But Unreal though, once you wait for like the code and whatnot, it just
So if you go into Unreal, can you make just basic 3D assets within their toolset, or do you have to go somewhere else?
Well, they do have presets. They actually geometry tool that allow you to actually extrapolate like blocks to a certain size. So yes, you can actually make the entire level using those.
Because I don't really want, I don't want to be even in Blender really. I don't want to spend too much time.
Yeah.
It's fun, but I shouldn't.
Yeah, the tooling. So Unreal has a thing called the geometry.
Yeah.
And you can compose a certain shape like stair, block, cube.
Yeah, I want maybe basic shapes, but then to be able to give them materials that sort of make them look realistic.
You can drag and drop material on top of it, and it will work. And the cool thing though is that you can select all of them, which is select. And Unreal has a math team dedicated to do this. They hire a whole math team to make the feature called mesh merging. And what happens is when you put the mesh merging there too, what you do is you use a so previously, like 2 years ago, they were using some project where
having one for only $1 seems really good.
Now they have a team and they hire
They did it themselves and they did it right.
and they were so now all the shit can be merged and all the joints, the vertex will actually connect to the different point stuff in all. And then also
it's only like $15. Now I got a big
new picture and the map is serious. And they map right into the thing, so you can literally just after you come to level, you can literally just select the whole level and just do a merge. And then regular you and when you start playing, it will literally just the same match, what's passing or not. So
I've got a
time saver, especially game designer.
interface.
I'm trying to teach that thing to all my fucking stupid kid. It's not my kid, but I'm talking about my team who
Oh,
are,
right.
who are skipping stupid shit. Literally just use the tool. They're like, no, I want to
Yes, exactly.
go to Nanya, thing, put it into the game. I'm like, you literally just put two fucking cubes and now it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Basically,
Yeah, I don't wanna,
it's actually the same processor.
3D.
Yeah, it's good.
It's just, someone else can handle that, it's fine for them.
So that's a feature, a lot of stuff, with like, you know, you really have to drag and drop captures, walk around.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, they have all the example project for vehicles, and it's actually usable.
But if you're like robotics, can you have multiple cameras?
That's just wires.
That works, okay, good.
Yeah, you can actually do very easily swap in camera and stuff.
Yeah.
The camera history is really good. The camera actually
It's
has
iPhone.
a lot of,
I loved it when I
you
first
can,
bought it.
there's a lot of settings to actually
You know,
use
6
like
months
DSLR.
later.
You can actually change
We're
it
having
up.
to buy a lot.
Even the shade of the camera. You can actually apply
Because,
custom
you know, it's got this
shading,
special app chip.
custom material on top of the camera.
Everything's
So
not
sometimes,
perfect.
so like in my game, for example, when my character is raised,
Two wires
the whole screen would change color and it would
I don't even want to
sometimes
transfer
raise
data,
and
just.
that will happen on the shade.
That's scripted.
Yeah.
Of your cable.
Okay.
The cable. I had one.
I just learned.
Yeah,
I just
totally
learned last
animation is
week
good.
that there's
Have
a
a lot of
setting.
that.
I can.
Retargeting is one of the time saving.
I understand this right from my perspective.
You can
I'm
retarget from a
decreasing
small map
security.
or bigger
In order
to a
to charge.
charge because the map will do that and all that.
There's a
Okay.
trust that you
As long as the moments.
trust. It's like I plug it into, let's say my work laptop to charge.
That'd be cool to see demo stuff like that here.
But iTunes is gonna pop up in
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
If you wanna copy that, no, personal and work,
I
no.
I might dive into it myself.
So no trust. Well, no trust, it turns out means
Oh, yeah.
no power, no power for charging.
Last January, they did a demo where they have the bot and also in real capture of the whole scene. So like
Anyway, it's funny, because
they
we
would
look into this world.
from the beach to some
In this world,
They're showing this is how good the render looks compared to real life.
No, not really. It's about replication though. So the bot and the thing
But in this
inside
other
the
world,
visualization do fakeness at the same
You
time.
make these,
Okay.
And then they all
soldered
like
a couple of
layers and
cables.
stuff, right? You show it.
They start to bend
model
my friend a
focus.
little bit, and it's really tiny, and I got one of the little things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was overplayed.
My saws in there.
Yeah, Unreal on the C++ side, a lot
But I
of
could do
outcome
it.
that has certified the code convention follows C#. So that's a little bit, if you come from traditional C, you'll be a little bit surprised, I would say. But I mean, I use C# before, so yeah.
Oh, is he the guy that flies the drones? Yeah.
Okay.
So like, which is Pascal.
This
Pascal
is,
case
we
for
work
fast
sort
and
of together
a lot of
on
Pascal case. Almost every Pascal
projects,
project really.
to make a drone fly and race.
Yeah, the structure is good. The documentation how to do stuff is not. So you have to, the only way to do stuff is just to
It was a challenge competition.
Right. Which is,
It was
Which is fine.
really, really poorly done.
Thank you, and it's very,
And
the thing though is a lot.
like we worked towards it,
You can
and
make
then,
your project
only
like
until
taller,
I
it's good.
three
Because
months ago,
you also have the header tool to build modules. So you don't have to put everything into a single module. You can
Well, it's
split it.
zero X, so it's theoretically
And
open.
you can run so Unreal has some CLI, they have a bunch
Zero
of
X,
CLI.
no, it's not.
But you have to know.
Well, they're probably the leaders.
I mean, literally, right? No, for the guy who don't know CLI, then it's hard,
Lockheed
but
Martin.
yeah.
like, if you're familiar with CLI, right, then you really just go to the folder and just run it.
It was
Yeah, basically allow you to
enjoyable
create
and
multiple
frustrating
headers.
for me.
Very
Okay, so
helpful.
those are
It's
pretty
literally very
simple,
similar
like,
to, actually very similar to,
That's the leader zero.
one of the
Well,
Google
my
message.
frustrations are mostly around, we came in with only
The
a couple
Google
weeks to go.
message program.
And
Oh,
it's like, well, what approach
One.
should we take?
The one you compile to get,
Could do this,
stuff
this,
that
and
you.
this. Okay, let's do that.
Protobuf?
Yeah, protocol, yeah.
Oh,
Very
okay.
similar.
Yeah, I've seen this before.
Yeah, very similar. Basically, you have like
Okay.
overlays thing and then
It's
use
not
the generation.
working as well as I thought. We could do
You
this
have
and
the
this.
runner, go to the source.
It went like that in time.
Have your header thing.
Very
Very handy.
Like where it
And
is.
with that, you know, you can, the
Well,
upload
you're
right,
they're,
really
they're working with the written problem.
comparable to C#.
Computer vision.
I was mostly working.
Nice in a way, but not really
not very good. Not very
I
good.
should actually turn down
Hey, thanks for presenting tonight and
Yeah,
enjoying
yeah.
your presentation. Again, ROS Hub, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if you don't want, to, I'll post up to the NVIDIA developers conference and see if anyone's interested. I mean, the request probably would have to come from you.
Well, so I mean, we're not,
No, not to speak here, but to speak at UW.
oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean.
Because
I know all
I don't know
of
if they want to
each
do
other.
a speak for 20, or thing for 15 people.
Yeah, we've invited them in the past. They've been,
You could mention that
mixed bag.
Jeff Dean has given talks many times.
Who's Jeff Dean?
Jeff Dean has presented many times.
And I told you.
Jeff Dean is the guy who created, well, he and others, but TensorFlow.
Oh.
And MapReduce, I would say, made it popular because he at Google did it, Bigtable and Google File System.
And he also used the fact that they were.
Yeah.
And
When he
NVIDIA
comes, it's been, also because he went to school.
No, NVIDIA came by what University of Washington.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yes. They're out of the hit lab.
So they belong.
Well, they're not the original company, but the technology that's now NVIDIA did come out of UW. So.
Yeah, I mean, I know, like, the folks who run the lab upstairs, it's Junior Fox, Nathan Radcliffe. So they're kind of the two folks who started Hulu Robotics. But they're like deeply involved with UW. They don't do talks really. I think they just don't do talks. And they had an open house a while ago. They kind of were like, yeah, we didn't do open house. We didn't want to do and they don't work on Isaac. So they work on the grasping algorithms. So I think I don't know that they have any developers on site that are like at least like part of the core Isaac. So they probably wouldn't want to talk about it.
Well, I'm pretty sure they'll be big in Boston 2 weeks from now.
Oh, that go to the
Big robotics conference.
yeah. What about
There's one in Chicago the week before that.
Oh, I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah.
I wish it was that.
Huh?
Oh, what event is that?
It's robotics conference. The Boston one, the big one. Why does all robotics have to be out of Boston?
Yeah.
MIT.
Yeah, they just got a lot of.
The Alpha Cloud, but anyway, There's only one group at MIT, but
yeah,
it's kind of everyone at MIT.
Well, aren't the Roomba guys, the iRobot is already out of Boston?
Boston Dynamics, man, the little
Jack.
fighting dog that breaks open doors and shit.
RIP. Yeah, you've got the funny looking animal kind of robots. What's the Boston Dynamics?
Yeah.
Okay. I worked with a woman who, her previous company got acquired by Amazon, and they built robots for getting things in warehouses.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Something with a K.
Something with a K. That's all I remember. Yeah. Like, I don't know anything about that. I just know.
Kiva.
Yeah. That's they got caught. That was like 20.
I just saw her emails, and when I visited in Boston, I met her.
Interesting. I wonder if she got fired because.
I don't think she left.
No, she did. Mary Jackson. NASA mathematician left in '85. Okay.
It's like 25 years.
Yeah. Suspicious time for all the mathematicians to start
Yeah,
retiring.
all mathematicians is very mathematician.
35 years. So 35 years is pretty long career.
Actually, when I talked about one organization that really doesn't know what the right hand and left hand are doing. NASA.
Really NASA?
Oh, big time. Oh, this
there's so many things going on, and it's like no control.
Oh, totally.
I mean, there's projects going on over here, it's like, oh yeah, we awarded that a month ago, it's like, this company, like, oh we did. Anyway, that's why you gotta deal with individual massive facilities.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many
We're dealing with names most of the time. Sent Karen down.
Oh, these chairs.
They can actually kind of stay wherever.
Okay.
Because, I don't know that the room needs to be in any particular shape.
Well,
It was totally empty. Okay, which is not normally how it is.
All right.
you
Well, take care, guys. All right, thank you. See ya.